Well, Proverbs chapter 1. Let's read the first 7 verses. I'll tell you where we're headed tonight. The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice and judgment and equity, to give subtlety to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and will increase learning, and a man of understanding shall attain unto wise counsels. To understand a proverb and the interpretation, the words of the wise and their dark sayings. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Over the years, I have looked at the book of Proverbs a number of times and wondered how to preach through the book. Because it is a collection of sayings on various topics, and those topics are scattered really all over the book. I've never been able to wrap my mind around how to lay out the book in a preaching series. I know some men who have preached through the book of Proverbs like a verse-by-verse study, and I've never figured out how I could do that without becoming very redundant halfway through. It's the same reason why I've never preached through the book of Psalms. In the book of Psalms, there's 100 Psalms that's about praise. And I've never figured out how, after I've preached through half of those Psalms about praise, what new thing do I say about praise in the next half of them? And so I've never been able to do that. And for those reasons, I've always thought that a better way to preach through Proverbs would be by subject. You can pick out a number of topics like child discipline, money, friendships, spirits, anger, things of that nature. And you can search for all of the wisdom that is found in that book on that subject and many more. In 2009, I preached a very brief mini-series here on character studies, and I called it Portraits in Proverbs. And what I did is I identified a number of persons or personages in the book. There's the simple, there's the scorner, there's the slanderer, there's the sluggard, there's the strife bearer. I think I had 17 of them. And I preached a few sermons on some of those characters. And I didn't finish it. And it's always been in my heart to go back and preach through Proverbs, but to preach through those character studies. So in the Wednesday nights that I'm here for the next few months, I want to look at different characters in the book of Proverbs. Each week, I'll pick out one character, and we'll find everything that the book of Proverbs says about that person and their character or their lack thereof. So we'll do these character sketches. Tonight, what I want to do is I want to just give you a survey of the book. It is my way. I can't just dive into it. I'm an introduction kind of guy. And so tonight, I want to introduce the book of Proverbs to you. I want to just do a little Bible study with you. And I want to just get us acclimated to the book of Proverbs, how it is laid out, what it is about, how to read it. And then at the end, I'll give you some suggestions as to how to read the book of Proverbs as we go through this. So when I look at a book, when I open up a book for the first time and study it, there's several questions, obvious, that you have to answer. The first question is the author, who wrote the book? Well, that's rather simple. Verse number 1, the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. You may know that in 1 Kings 4 and verse 32, the Bible says that Solomon spake 3,000 proverbs and that his songs were 1,005. Now, the fact that he spake them doesn't necessarily mean that he invented them. It may be sayings that he collected, or it may be sayings, proverbs, that he came up on his own. But he was known for 3,000 proverbs. But look, if you would, at chapter 30, the end of the book, second to last chapter. Look at chapter 30 and verse number 1, where it says the words of Agur, the son of Jacob, even the prophecy. Now, we don't know nothing about this man named Agur. There's a couple of other men that are mentioned in this verse. We don't know anything about that. Some commentators suggest that Agur was a pen name for Solomon. They're guessing. That's all they're doing. They're just simply guessing. So I'm going to guess that it's not. All right? Then look at chapter 31. Chapter 31 and verse 1, the words of King Lemuel, the prophecy that his mother taught him. Again, he's never mentioned anywhere else in the Bible. We don't know anything about him. So from those three statements, here's what I would conclude. Solomon wrote chapter 1 through chapter 29. This man named Agur wrote chapter 30. This man, King Lemuel, whoever that is, wrote chapter 31. However, look if you would in chapter 10. Chapter 10. In chapter 10 and verse number 1, the Proverbs of Solomon. Well, for the first 9 chapters, we've been reading the Proverbs, we presume, of Solomon. Now in chapter 10 and verse 1, it tells us these are the Proverbs of Solomon. Now, I don't believe that that means that everything written before this was written by somebody else, and now we get Solomon's Proverbs. I think it just marks a new section in the book. Look, if you would, in chapter 22. Chapter 22 and verse number 17. Chapter 22, verse 17. Bow down thine ear and hear the words of the wise. Some commentators take that statement to mean that now we're not hearing the words of Solomon. Now it's going to be the sayings of various wise men. Look, if you would, at chapter 24 and verse 23. Chapter 24, verse 23. These things belong to the wise, to the wise. So a lot of commentators say that everything from chapter 22, verse 17 through 24 and verse 23 are the words of somebody besides Solomon. I don't think so. I think that those are just general statements to say, listen to a wise man. I don't have enough evidence for me to say that anybody else, any anonymous author beside the three that are named, wrote any of the Proverbs. So I believe that Solomon wrote chapter 1 through 29. Agur wrote chapter 30. Lemuel wrote chapter 31. Then you look at the date. When was it written? Solomon was the king over Israel from 971 through 931 BC, 40 years. But look, if you would, in chapter 25 and verse 1. These are also the Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied out. These are the sayings of Solomon, but in Hezekiah's day, which is 200 years after Solomon, 200 and some years, Hezekiah evidently had some scribes that found or had, by oral tradition, they had the sayings, the common sayings of Solomon, and they wrote them down from chapter 25 on. They collected some of those sayings. So it is most likely that the contents of the book are certainly in existence in Solomon's day, but they weren't all collected as a book until Hezekiah's day. As for the 2 chapters for Agur and Lemuel, I have no idea when they wrote them, because I have no idea when they lived. The next thing I look at a book is I look at genre. I'm going to cover this in much detail in Bible Institute class in the next 2 weeks. But the book of Proverbs is in what we call the wisdom section of the Bible. You know, the book of Job, Psalms, you have Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. Now, that's not to say that there's not any wisdom in any other book of the Bible, but that's the genre in which they are written. The purpose of those books is to help people, God's people, to be wise so that they can live a fruitful life in their relationship with God and with others. Proverbs is also written in the form of Hebrew poetry. Now, here is the problem with Hebrew poetry. When we write poetry, we write it to rhyme. We write it with sounds. All right? Roses are red, violets are blue, sugar is sweet, and so am I, or so are you, however that goes. All right? We write it to rhyme. Hebrew poetry, they didn't write it to convey a sound, a rhyme. They wrote it to convey a thought or an idea. They wrote it in parallelism. What that simply means is they put statements side by side that are similar statements, not sound alike, but are similar statements. That's what Hebrew poetry looks like. So the second statement would either contrast or expand the first statement. Now, I'm not going to get deep into this. I'll do this in hermeneutics class. There are three kinds of parallelism. There's more, but there's three kinds just for tonight, all right? There is antithetical parallelism. That is a contrasting of two ideas. I'll give you an example. Chapter 10 and verse number 27. There'll be a key word in this verse. Chapter 10 and verse 27, the fear of the Lord prolongeth days. Here's the key word, but the years of the wicked shall be shortened. Two phrases contrasting. Look in chapter 11, right there at it, same page, chapter 11 and verse 1. A false balance is abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. That's one form of parallelism. There's a second parallelism that's called synonymous parallelism. That's the continuation of an idea. Look at chapter 1. Look at chapter 1. Chapter 1 and verse number 8. There's a key word that you'll look for. My son, hear the instruction of thy father, and, there's the key word, and forsake not the law of thy mother. Look at chapter 22. There's hundreds of them. We'll give you two of them. Look at chapter 22, verse number 1. A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and loving favor rather than silver and gold. So you have parallelism where an idea is contrasted. You have parallelism where an idea is continued. Then you have synthetic parallelism where an idea is compared, a comparison. Look at chapter 26. Chapter 26 and verse number 1. Here's the key word. As snow in summer and as rain in harvest, so honor is not seemly for a fool. You look for words as, so, like. Look at chapter 21. Chapter 21 and verse 27. The sacrifice of the wicked is abomination. How much more when he bringeth it with a wicked mind? So a lot of Hebrews, a lot of Proverbs is written in parallelism. You look for that as you go through the book. Now, one question that needs to be asked, and it is this: what is a proverb? What is a proverb? The Hebrew word that we get proverb from means to be like or to represent. It is a comparison or a contrast of two truths, usually stated in a short saying. It generally expresses a truth in a short sentence rather than in a multitude of words. Some of the definitions I've come across are pointed precepts for practical prudence, laws from heaven for life on earth, counsels from above for conduct below. It is a wise, here's my definition, it is a wise saying that is spoken in few but well-chosen words. You know, there are some people that think that in order to convey a great idea, you got to use a lot of words. But a wise man learns the art of leaving the unnecessary unsaid. Brevity is a mark of wisdom. Let's say it again. Brevity is a mark of wisdom. Wise men learn to speak in measured, controlled, polished, composured words. He gathers his thoughts first. He formulates his logic or his argument, and then he presents it in a measured tone with as little extra embellishment as possible. Brevity is a mark of wisdom. There's a second question that needs to be answered. I'm just laying groundwork is all I'm doing tonight. What is a proverb? Here's the second question. Are proverbs promises? Usually the biggest question that is asked from the book of Proverbs is, should we take all of the Proverbs as a dogmatic statement of fact that are unfailingly true every time? And I don't believe so. I believe that Proverbs are wise observations. They are divine guidelines. They teach eternal principles. But they are not always inflexible laws or absolute promises. I believe that there are some exceptions because of the fallenness of man. I'll give you an example. Proverbs 15 and verse number 1. Proverbs 15 and verse 1, a soft answer turneth away wrath. If you're in a conversation with an angry man, a furious man, the best course of action is not to elevate it. It's not to make this even hotter. No, cooler heads prevail. And so soft answer turns away wrath. However, sometimes you can speak softly to a man and he still gets angry. It's a general truth. It is a general principle. You ought to put it in practice. It'll help you keep out of a lot of trouble. It'll help avoid contention and a lot of disagreements. But there may be an exception to that. Look at chapter 16. Proverbs chapter 16 and verse number 7. When a man's ways please the Lord, he maketh even his enemies to be at peace with him. Living for the Lord will give you a good relationship with other men, even with your enemies. Just living for the Lord and pleasing Him and living by the Bible, boy, that's going to help you a lot, even with men that are your enemy, that are against you, your neighbor that doesn't like you. But sometimes you may run across a man that just hates God, and he's not going to be at peace with you no matter how you live. I'll give you a very difficult one, Proverbs 22. Proverbs 22 and verse number 6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. I've seen that verse used two ways. I think both ways are wrong. I have seen some use that verse as an excuse for their poor parenting. I've seen that. I've seen others use the verse to beat over the head of anybody who lost their children. I've seen that. I had a preacher friend, if I called his name, everybody in this room would know who I'm talking about immediately. And he asked me about this verse sitting right here in this auditorium not long ago. And he asked me about this very verse because all of his children are not serving the Lord. And that verse, he believes, is a principle. It's a principle is what it is. It's a general principle that's true. But it doesn't negate the will of a child when he's old to get a bad influence, get out from under your influence. We've seen that happen. I have seen men who were much better men than me, and their children go astray. I believe I can claim this verse, but I don't believe it's an absolute dogmatic statement. It is a proverb is what it is. It's a proverb. It's not an absolute dogmatic promise that negates the will of a teenager. So what is a proverb? When I look at the Proverbs tonight, I look at what is the purpose of them. What does a proverb do? I'll give you three tonight as we look at this and just to kind of wrap our minds around this. The first thing I would say tonight is that Proverbs defines wisdom. It defines wisdom. Come back to chapter 1. Come back to chapter 1. Look at verse number 2 through 7. Here's the purpose of Proverbs. It's to know wisdom and instruction. It's to perceive the words of understanding. It's to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, equity. It's to give subtlety to the simple. It's to give knowledge and discretion to the young man. It's to learn, in verse 7, the fear of the Lord and to be wise. By the way, there's much been written about the fear of the Lord and what is it. G. Campbell Morgan wrote that there's two kinds of fears. There is the fear that God will hurt me. There is the fear that I will hurt God. Now, G. Campbell Morgan went on to say that the fear that God will hurt me is a selfish fear. The fear that I will hurt God is grounded in love. I think that both aspects play into the fear of God. Because you see, I don't want the chastisement of God upon my life. I don't want God to curse and with the cankerworm my finances and my health. I have the knowledge that if I don't live according to His word and to His law, God can hurt me. That's a healthy fear is what that is. But at the same time, I want my life to honor Him. I don't want to bring dishonor to God. So fearing God, that's the first step of wisdom and understanding. You know, the book of Job, the book of Ecclesiastes are two books of wisdom. We went through the book of Ecclesiastes just recently. And Job and Ecclesiastes both approach wisdom from the question of why. Why? Job cries out from a bitter experience of life, and here's what he asks: why is this happening to me? The writer of Ecclesiastes, he looks at the futility of a life that is lived without God, and he asks, why does it matter? What's the point here? And neither book fully answers the why question, but they do answer the what question. The what question. Job writes in Job 1 and verse number 20. Let me turn back here quickly. Job 1 and verse number 20. Here's what Job says. Job says in verse 21, naked came I out of my mother's womb. Naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. That's what our response to suffering ought to be. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. And then in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, Solomon, again, what are we to do when we live in a confusing world? He writes in Ecclesiastes 12 verse 13, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. That's what you are to do. So they approach wisdom from the why question. They don't answer the why question. They answer what you should do. The book of Proverbs stands in between and answers the how question. The practical instructions that are needed to live wisely. The book of Proverbs is to tell you that you can live your life in such a way that it will bring glory to God, that you can have a faithful and a fruitful life, that your days can be well numbered and orderly. This is what you are to do, and this is how you do it. Now you will notice the verses that we read in Proverbs chapter 1, that Proverbs uses similar words. It uses instruction, understanding, knowledge, learning, wisdom. We'll not parse all of those words, but some people think that knowledge and wisdom are one and the same, but they're not. We live in a generation that has an expansion of knowledge or an explosion of knowledge. But the world's wisdom has not kept up with the world's knowledge. Do you know that medical science can take a mother that has just found out that she's expecting, and medical science can just withdraw out just a sample of fluid. And just with a sample of fluid can determine at the earliest stages of the pregnancy the sex of that child, male or female. They can take a sample of fluid from the mother and they can test that unborn child for over 70 genetic diseases before that child is ever born. There is an explosion of knowledge. I heard about a couple in Texas. She was expecting, they were hoping to have either a boy or girl, I don't know which. They went to the doctor, they had it tested to see what was the sex of their child. It was not what they wanted. And they went and had the baby aborted. Knowledge, but no wisdom. The design of the book of Proverbs is not to make you smart, it is to make you wise. You might want to write this down. Wisdom has an intellectual dimension. Wisdom is a keen mind. It enables you to assimilate information, to evaluate a situation, to appraise the validity of a story. You don't have to have a high IQ in order to know and to perceive and to increase learning and to understanding. There is an intellectual dimension. But then wisdom has a moral dimension. If you'll notice in verse number 3, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice and judgment and equity. Wisdom is the ability to determine truth from error, good from evil, better from best. It's a moral equivalency. But then wisdom has a practical dimension. In fact, hold your finger right here. I'll take you out of Proverbs for a moment. Look at Exodus chapter 28. Law of first mention. If you're in hermeneutics, you know what that is. Law of first mention. Let me show you the first time wisdom is found in the Bible. It's Exodus 28, verse number 3. Thou shalt speak unto all that are wise-hearted, whom I have filled with the spirit of wisdom, that they may make Aaron's garments to consecrate him, that he may minister unto me in the priest's office. Chapter 31, verse 3, here's the second mention of wisdom. Chapter 31 and verse 3, I have filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom and in understanding and in knowledge and in all manner of workmanship. The first time that the word wisdom is found in your Bible, it is speaking of men that Moses has tasked with building the tabernacle. Bezalel and Aholiab, I think are their names. God gave those men wisdom and understanding and knowledge. Watch this. Not to sit around and enter into useless debates, but to do something with their hands and to get a work done. Wisdom is not just a mental ability to help you to win some kind of argument or to prove how smart you are. No, wisdom is the practical ability to live and accomplish a task and to accomplish a calling. So Proverbs defines wisdom. Secondly, Proverbs develops character. If a man will heed the counsel of Proverbs, it will build in him the integrity and the character of a faithful life. Character is more important than charisma. Character is more important than a creed. It is more important than your personality. It is more important than what you profess to believe. And there's no other book that's more dedicated in the Bible to developing character. And we can argue that there's no greater need amongst Christians than the need for godly character. Proverbs will not only develop character in you, Proverbs will help you to identify character in other people. A parent needs to be able to recognize the character traits in their child. We're told to avoid wicked men, angry men, dishonest men. People like that should not be our friends. Talebearers should be avoided. But you've got to know who they are to avoid them. And choosing a young man better know the difference between the seductress in Proverbs chapter 7 and the virtuous woman in Proverbs chapter 31. You better be able to judge character. You know, one of the mysteries of Proverbs is that it was written by Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, yet who did not always follow his own advice. He warned the young man of the strange woman. That's one of the characters we'll look at, the strange woman. But he fell into the trap of the strange woman. So how do you take the advice of a wise man who sometimes lived like a fool? And I give you two statements. And the first is this, is that we learn to expect to be tested in those areas where we seem to be the strongest. Our strengths can become our weaknesses. A man who is gifted to preach, if he's not careful, can listen to the praise of other people and get lifted up with pride in his heart. I have found men who had a lot to say about child rearing become severely tested with a wayward child. And when we look at Solomon, it warns us to beware of our strengths as well as our weaknesses. The second statement that I would say is that we learn that knowing what is right is not enough. Wisdom is not in knowing. Wisdom is in doing. Good character doesn't come from preaching to others. Good character comes from practicing it in your own life. So Proverbs defines wisdom and Proverbs develops character. Here's my third statement. Proverbs does away with the distinction between the sacred and the secular. Here's what I mean by this. A lot of Christians have the idea that I have my church life and I have my secular life. I do sacred things while I am at church. I do secular things when I am away from church. Did you know that in the book of Proverbs you're never at church in the book? In the book of Proverbs, you're at home, you're on the job, you're dealing with other people. And your religious rituals have no value if they are not translated into righteous living. This is how James would say it. Be ye doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving your own selves. He says in verse 26, if any man among you seem to be religious and bridleth not his tongue, but deceiveth his own heart, this man's religion is in vain. Christianity is not lived in the abstract. Christianity is lived on an application level. Principles must be translated into practice. If you follow the book of Proverbs, you will be happier, you will be more prosperous, you will be better off financially, you will have better friends, you will be a better neighbor, but that is not the primary focus of the book. No. If you follow the divine principles of Proverbs, you will also be godly and righteous in your conduct, and that is the primary aim of the book. It is not just to make you happy. It is to make you holy. No distinction between the sacred and the secular. That is my survey of the book of Proverbs. I have 17 characters, 17 people that I find in this book. I don't know if we'll look at all 17. I hope that we do. And I want to just take one a week. The first guy that I'm going to look at is the simple man. Not the stupid, but the simple man. Now let me give you a couple of suggestions. I want to sing 252 again, each step I take. So I want to sing that in just a minute. So let me give you a couple of suggestions tonight. The book of Proverbs is a rich, rich book. We're going to cover a lot of characters, but there's going to be a whole lot of Proverbs that we're not covering because we're not going verse by verse. And I really believe that you will get more out of the book is if you do more than just come and listen to me lecture. All right? So here's a couple of suggestions. You ought to read a chapter a day corresponding to the day of the month. How to do that? So on day 30, read chapter 30. If a month only has 30 days, then that day read chapter 30 and 31. If you'll do that, you can read through the book of Proverbs once a month. Once a month. Now that ought not be all of your Bible reading. Okay? But incorporate that into your Bible reading. Brother John Peeler has done that for years. We could stand John Peeler. He's never memorized the book of Proverbs, but we've done this. We could stand Brother Peeler up in our services, and we could read the first half of any verse at random from the book of Proverbs, and he could finish the verse. That's how well he knows the book of Proverbs. All he's done is every day read the chapter corresponding to that day. Maybe you would read through the book of Proverbs looking for all the verses on a various topic. If you are somebody who has a problem with, let's say, anger will destroy relationships. Then you ought to go through the book of Proverbs with a pen or a notepad and find every verse that deals with the angry spirit. If your finances are a mess, Proverbs has a lot to say about finances. All right? Or mark all of the different characters that we're going to look at. We'll look at all of them. Take a pen, mark them. Here's the other thing. Find Proverbs that particularly apply to you and seek to make those Proverbs a part of your decision-making process. Don't make big decisions based on emotions, based on what you perceive as the situation, based on the counsel of some friend that doesn't know God. Learn to make decisions based on Bible principles. It'll make for a richer life. All right, that's an introduction. The introduction of Proverbs. I hope that it whets your appetite, makes you want to read the book of Proverbs.